Today, we're diving into a really crucial topic here in Canada, truth and reconciliation. We're going to be using Jason Carter's guide, Walking Together, to help us unpack this massive journey, what it's all about, and, what part we can all play in it.
Here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into the history behind why we even need to have this conversation. Then, we'll look at the blueprint laid out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. From there, we'll zero in on what we can do personally. And we'll wrap up by looking at a vision for the future.
All right, let's jump into our first section, understanding the historical context. Because really, to figure out where we're going, we've got to be honest about where we've been.
This is the big question, right? Why is this so necessary? Well, the answer goes way back. It's rooted in a long, painful history of policies that were designed, systemically, to erase Indigenous cultures, identities, and rights. And those wounds, they're still here today.
This timeline really tells a stark story. It kicks off in 1876 with the Indian Act, a piece of legislation basically designed to control every aspect of Indigenous life. Then, just a few years later, the residential school system was set up with the specific goal of forced assimilation, tearing children from their families and cultures. And think about this. It wasn't until 2008 that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created to officially document what happened. This quote just hits the nail on the head. We're not talking about ancient history here. The effects of these policies are very much alive. They've created real-world, systemic barriers that continue to affect Indigenous communities every single day.
Okay, so with a history that heavy, how does a country even begin to move forward? Well, there's a blueprint for that, and it comes from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. First, let's be clear on what these two words mean, because they're different but totally connected. Truth has to come first. That's the part where we face the hard facts and acknowledge the harm that was done. Reconciliation, that's what comes next. It's the action part, the continuous work of actually fixing those broken relationships. And you can only do that once you agree on the truth.
And the TRC was the key body tasked with this enormous job. Their main role was to listen to the survivors of residential schools, to document their truths for all of Canada to see, and then to create a roadmap for all of us to follow. And all that work, it led to this number, 94. The TRC issued 94 calls to action. And these aren't just vague suggestions. This is a detailed, structural blueprint for how to achieve reconciliation across the entire country. And just look at the scope here. These calls cover everything: child welfare, education, language, health, justice. The list goes on. This makes it crystal clear that reconciliation isn't just a task for the government. It's something that involves every single part of our society.
Which, of course, brings us to our third section, your role in the journey. Because these calls to action, they're not something to just sit back and watch. They're a call for each of us to get off the sidelines and move from just knowing about the problem to actively doing something about it.
The guide makes a really important distinction here. Passive awareness, that's just knowing the facts, knowing that residential schools happened. But active allyship, that's a whole different level. It's a commitment. It means you're actively listening, you're learning, and you're taking steps to support Indigenous peoples. It's a verb. It's something you do.
So what does that look like in practice? The guide breaks it down into 4 pillars. First, just listen and learn. Approach Indigenous histories and stories with humility. Second, get involved in your own community. Go to events, support local initiatives. Third, actively support Indigenous creativity. Buy from artists, read books by Indigenous authors, celebrate their culture. And fourth, look inward. Reflect on your own position and use your voice to advocate for real systemic change. And this quote just says it all. Being an ally isn't a final destination, like you get a certificate and you're done. No, it's an ongoing journey. It requires you to constantly reflect, to be humble enough to know you won't always get it right, and to be committed to keep trying. So, where's all this leading? Well, in our final section, we're going to look at that vision for the future. And it's a vision of hope, of working together, of walking together. If there's one thing to take away, it's this. Reconciliation is not a finish line. It's not a project that you can just complete. The real vision for the future is a path that we walk together, continuously, focused on building real, honest partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
And this quote shows you the incredible potential of that partnership. When we walk this path together, the benefits are for everyone. We can work together to protect the land we all share and build a sustainable future based on a vision that honors Indigenous wisdom and ensures this country's beauty is here for generations to come.
So, we'll end on this question. The path of reconciliation is a long one, and it's built one step at a time by each of us. The real question isn't if you should be on the path, but what your very next step is going to be. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.